You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo for another edition of this week's Long Island News, the news show that brings you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. Well, now we're very grateful to be joined by Elaine Gross, who is the founder and current president of Erase Racism, a Long Island-based nonprofit organization that aims to address racism through academic research, educating the public, policy advocacy, legal actions, and civic engagement of Long Island leaders, community organizations, and community members of all ages and backgrounds. Well, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
Hey, anytime. And usually, when we have a guest on, and this is your first time, we kind of try to make you make a promise that you'll come back and talk to us. Because we're here, we're just trying to put the real thing out there, the information, not the stories and not the, there's so much static in the air these days. And it's really great to go right to the source and hear what organizations like yours are doing.
Of course. And certainly, Bill mentioned a lot of the reasons. We're happy to have you join us today in our audience to discuss these important matters. And we certainly look forward to discussing some of the work, again, that Erase Racism is doing to address hate and inequality on the island, particularly around public school education. I know there was a report recently released that we'll get into, housing issues, community development. But first, we unfortunately did want to start with your perspective and I guess the organizations on processing hate-based mass killings, like the one we did see carried out recently by a white supremacist who targeted shoppers at a grocery store in a historically Black community on the east side of Buffalo across our state. So thank you again for joining us. I know there's a lot of important matters, and unfortunately we'll start there and then obviously expand.
Mm-hmm. So my first thought is that we should not be surprised by this happening at this point. The violence, which has historically been perpetrated upon African Americans or Black people in particular, which has stemmed from the whole embrace of white supremacy and the intention of basically saying your lives don't matter. And so I believe that when you add that with the availability of guns, we should not be surprised. That doesn't take away the sting and the deep sorrow that we all feel for the victims and families and the community as a whole. But it is, I'm quite frankly, I don't feel it's appropriate anymore to just say, a variation of our thoughts and prayers are with you and all of that, because there are some things that are predictable. And this is one of those things that is predictable. And if you didn't believe it before, you should definitely believe it by now, right. Because it wasn't only history long ago, but it's very recent history where we've seen these kind of mass killings. And so there isn't the political will at the moment in certainly at the national level with Congress, with the majority in the Senate. There is not any intention of stopping this. And that is, if you want to talk about being distressed, that's what I'm distressed about, because it speaks to the inability of a democratic country, supposedly democratic country, to deal with an issue like this. If our democracy doesn't work, when it comes to something so fundamental and in your face, then you have to say to yourself, wait a minute, what good is it? You know, it becomes a horrible question to ask, not one that I would ever think that I would question. But it does bring up just a lot of questions if we cannot manage with our democracy to address this issue when we know what the problems are. We know that there has been this consistent violence against Black people, certainly individuals. We've seen it in the killings, by police officers, at the hands of police officers. But these mass killings, we've also seen, whether it's in a grocery store or at a church and
school.
At a school. So this is, I don't have much to say on this topic other than people have to be very clear in their minds who is not acting in our best interest, and then use the only means we have, which is our vote, to make sure that in the future we have people who will act in our best interest.
Well said. Yep. I agree with you 100%. The thing you said is that nobody should be surprised that this happened, and my mind goes to the idea that nobody should be surprised, and we should all be expecting that it'll happen again.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else changes, then why would anyone?
In the space of 5 days, we saw 4 of these.
Yeah, Uvalde, Texas.
So for anybody to be surprised, number one, like what you said, is ludicrous. Where have you been? What planet do you live on? That the other, and that's not to minimize this, but I see a connection between the idea that most Americans want universal health care too. Out of 57 industrialized nations, we're the only one that doesn't have it. And you talk about a democratic system that is supposed to be the will of the people, and we don't see that happening. And Black folks haven't seen that happen for 200 years.
Well, and I know you talk about healthcare, and obviously there's a lot of discussion around the inequities and not just maternal mortality rates, but a lot of other kind of healthcare towards individuals of color, and again just kind of that whole professional area, kind of being catered towards not people who are minorities. But that said, Bill, and definitely again, thank you, Elaine, for unpacking that again in the way that you did. But given, and we are about to speak with someone who actually is running for Congress, and we've spoken with many of the elected officials after some of these tragedies. And like you said, prayers and thoughts are one thing, but what can ultimately come out of it? And what do you think can be done, though, if in lieu of seeing actual legislation, seeing actual progress made on the federal level, what can be done to prevent individuals, maybe in the community level, from getting indoctrinated in this hate and racism, in particular that we saw happen, again, in Buffalo and places like El Paso, Texas, other incidents, of course, like in South Carolina, Charleston in history, unfortunately. What can be done maybe on that micro level? I know your organization does a lot to, again, try to deal with racism, maybe on that kind of level.
Well, we do have workshops and consultations that focus on helping individuals through organizations that they are associated with. So it could be a nonprofit, it could be a for-profit business, it could be schools, private or public, various organizations. We do work with them, and that means those workshops are touching those individuals and hopefully helping to change the organizations that they are engaged with. We think that anti-racism training is very important. And what we've learned from it is that a lot of people, first of all, they don't know the truth about our history. And So that's very important, because if you don't know the truth about the history, you will keep repeating it in one way or another.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I can say that a lot of our students today are still not getting the truth about our history, because we work with students too, as part of the education work that we do. And, they tell us, no, I didn't know about that.
Yep.
I didn't know about Long Island. I heard of Levittown, and I thought of it as the first suburb, but I didn't know about the racial covenants and the deeds.
Yep.
Sometimes they say we had an event, we have another one coming up in another week or so. Well, we had an event last year rather, with high school students. We held it at the Joseph Lloyd Manor, which is a somewhat famous place here on Long Island that had enslaved Africans and their descendants. And the students were saying, we had that on Long Island. I thought that was something we had in the South. So not even on a basic level, knowing that, yes, we had slaves on Long Island, enslaved people on Long Island, and we had, large Klan rallies on Long Island. Yeah. And, it is, so if the children still aren't getting it, you can imagine that a lot of the adults that we see in our workshops really don't understand the history, don't know what white supremacy is, don't know the ways in which systematically both the governments and other institutions and groups have systematically targeted African Americans, sometimes killed them, but other times made sure that they could not actually keep their homes or keep their wealth through those kinds of mass terror, like the Tulsa. And so there is, so people need to understand that, and then they need to see how it plays out, what structural racism is all about, which is part of what we were getting at in our education report. When we were talking about the structural impediments to equity based on how our school districts are organized and what resources some districts get and other districts don't get.
Yeah, of course. And that goes back to your point of, housing as an issue, and where, again, certain communities are and what resources they get versus, other communities. People often think of right where we're at, in terms of Garden City versus, across, again, the town lines into Hempstead, and other, kind of surrounding townships. But point is, as you raised, that the education, kind of is that foundation. And knowing that people aren't naturally born racist, I would think, that, research has bared out. But it is this learned, unfortunate reality, or in some cases, the unlearned realities, that lead people to, hate and scapegoat and all these other things throughout history. So I know there has been a push for more curriculum kind of based requirements for whether it be teaching the Holocaust, teaching, African-American, studies and history, AAPI, history and contributions. So can you talk about that? And again, of course, this report that came out in terms of, what we're actually seeing now in terms of those resources applied, and how we can bridge the gap maybe.
Yeah.
So there are two things happening. There is a push internally by some districts, and of course, Erase Racism has been pushing for this as well as other organizations, to have, and I should say the New York State Education Department too, with their framework for culturally responsive, sustaining education and their policy around diversity, equity, and inclusion. These are all good things that are saying school districts need to change They need to update their curriculum. They need to have a wider array of books available, literature available, different authors. Their social studies classes need to make sure that they're teaching the full truth. And all of those things are good. At the same time, there is a movement of individuals that are, and of groups that are saying, oh, no, wait a minute, we don't want that taught. We don't even want what you used to teach taught.
Right. No, we don't want to get better. We want to get much worse, right? We don't want to get,
Yeah.
You know,
and so far, New York State has escaped the new laws that are being passed in some states around the country that are under the general heading of being anti-CRT.
Right.
Yeah, of course. That's
but the reality is what they're talking about is don't talk about race. Don't make white students uncomfortable by talking about these things that that don't put the United States in a good light. So I mean, it's really, I mean, and they vary somewhat, the direction they go in with that. We've had some that people were trying to put forward here in New York State, but there wasn't any movement on them in this legislative session, unless it jumps in today or something. So I think that we've escaped another year from having that here. But we need to proactively be more standardized in saying that this is not an optional thing. This is something that really needs to be incorporated into all of the school districts.
Understood. And certainly, we've talked with a lot of the school district superintendents throughout the island, and them talking about a lot of those school board meetings that got very, very tense and escalated, unfortunately, way beyond the bounds. They equated it to the fights that they would see maybe at sporting kind of events in the past, where now parents are yelling and screaming and cursing and fighting each other.
We've kind of discovered that a lot of the school board meetings have been stacked with people who don't even go to those districts. So you can see some of the shenanigans that are going on at school board meetings. I think the other thing, and then the broader thing and John and I have talked about this a couple of times. I saw a comedy routine, and I love comedians because they bring up stuff that regular people are afraid to talk about. One of the things that he said. There used to be the wars. We have a war on everything. So it was the rich against the poor. And then we have black and white. And then we have, make the dichotomies any way you want. But he kind of said that right now, the war in America, certainly, is the truth and lies. That's the dichotomy that we're in. So now, you're in a situation where you want to look at the curriculums in school and pedagogy. How are they teaching things? And somebody brings up CRT. This is to muddy the waters because now, we're a civilization of sound bites and memes, and now they have those who would use it, against the idea of learning. I think that hit the nail right on the head. It's truth and lies. And when we talk to people, one of my first questions to a lot of folks is, do you think an election was stolen? And if they say yes, I don't know what to do with them. I just don't know what to do with them. How do you have, there are a lot of leaders calling for unity. Well, how can you have unity when we can't agree on, a democracy? It depends on its agreed upon truths, and an autocracy depends on its agreed upon lies. We have to separate the bad yeast from the bread. Otherwise, none of us are going to go forward.
Well, certainly, and that's the issue too, where even if, we do have in theory curriculums that are more inclusive and more expansive in terms of, the actual kind of nuanced histories for all the bad and all the good, the point is you're going to have people who are, seeking out information streams, whether it be on cable news, whether it be on the internet, on, forums that, aren't in the public. And they can get, whatever they're looking for, kind of reinforced, which is another issue there.
An echo chamber,
point.
Yeah, you can find
Yeah,
them.
of course. So let's remind our listeners they are listening to this week's Long Island News here on 90.3 WHPC, the radio voice of Nassau Community College. And we are joined, thankfully, still by Elaine Gross, the founder and president of Erase Racism, again, a Long Island-based anti-racism organization.
And Elaine, your social media presence, where can we find you and find out information about you and
the organization?
Yeah, what the organization is doing.
Well, certainly go to our website, and which is eraseracismny.org. And, you can find everything there, including various reports. I have to give a plug for our report. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but it's unequal resources for Long Island students based on race.
Yes.
And one of the reasons why we start with research always, we deal in the world of facts. And so this is very important for people to understand that on average, the intensely segregated districts, that's 90 to 100% non-white districts, that they have less revenue per student, about $10,000 less as compared to white districts. They also have less access to AP courses, to guidance counselors, teachers, social workers. These are structural disparities that those 11 intensely segregated districts come up on the short end of the stick there as compared to the white districts. And that kind of a structure, which is a structural impediment to equity, often the narrative is, the students don't care, or the parents don't care, or the teachers don't care. People have all kinds of stories. But what they don't have is the facts. And the facts are, if you have $10,000 less per student, you figure it out.
Right.
If a student can't take an AP course because it's not available to them, it's not that they're not smart enough or they don't want to work hard or all of those other things that people come up with. They don't have access to the course. And so we also looked at the work that the New York State Comptroller's Office does with their stress scores. And I'm not an expert on their research, but the takeaway is that these same districts also have fiscal stress. And we kind of figured that out. We didn't have the term for it, but we kind of figured it out when in 2021, getting 2021, we began calling intensely segregated districts to see whether or not, to see how they were doing with their students and devices that could be used remotely for instruction.
Oh, right.
What we found out was not what we expected. We had a donor that gave us a few devices and we thought, we could be helpful. But what we found out is that a lot of students had never had a device, period. So that means from March 20 until the beginning of 21, students did not have any kind of a device that they could use to log into classrooms for instruction. And we know that the instruction in general that could take place during COVID, during lockdown, was less than optimal, for anybody, even if people did have all of the equipment, the proper equipment.
Of course.
But again, let folks figure that out themselves. What do you think if you didn't have an opportunity to see your teacher, to interact with your teacher, to see work, to do work, all of that kind of thing, because you didn't have a device? And districts who have fiscal stress don't have, a pot of money sitting around. There's an emergency. Okay, well, I'll buy a few hundred or 1,000 devices for my students. You don't have that.
No, exactly.
So it's another structural impediment to equity, which we say that the New York State legislature, New York State Education Department, they definitely need to not keep everything the way it is, and then once in a while try to do something around the edges. Well, here's a little extra money
to make it look good, right? Yeah.
Yep. Let's change the structure. Is what we say.
That's incredible. I never heard. I'm starting to burn just thinking about those kids not having, and we never heard a peep. I never heard that rise in a news cycle, or there was never a mention of there's a school district or whatever, they need 2,000
of course. Screen. And just to build off of that in the time that we have left here, knowing that learning loss was discussed a lot during the pandemic, but I think to your point, Elaine, and as the report kind of bared out that, and we saw this with a lot of issues during the pandemic, where those amplified and accelerated and made worse these disparities. And, again, people now are seeing them, maybe even in brighter, kind of color, but what will be done? And, there was a lot of funding, from the pandemic. There are people who, were trying to, raise these issues, obviously, like your organization here, to say now is the moment not to, go back to the way it was, or to take steps backwards, but to move forward, obviously, in a better way. And, I guess another issue that I know your group has been working on, and, we'll have to talk about it another time more in depth, but is housing. And, Bill and I always talk about affordable housing here. And, Bill likes to always ask people, I know there's a technical definition, but what does it really mean to you? Because that can be very subjective, in terms of having to, you have so much of your income just to have shelter, especially on the island. So I guess, what would you say, I guess, is being done maybe, or what can be done, and the priorities? I know there's discussion about ADUs, transit-oriented development, stuff like that on the island here, to try to, deal with some of the effects of, like we said, Levittown and other urban planning that was problematic.
Well, there are two things that are promising. The first thing is that as a result of conversation I had with the Newsday publisher, they did that investigation, 3-year investigation, and the results came out in 2019. That triggered the New York State Senate to get serious. The very next month, I got a call to be an expert witness for the New York State Senate's public hearings. And as a result of that, in December 2021, is that right? This is 2022, right? Yeah. Right. Last December, they signed 9 bills. 9 bills were passed. The governor signed them into law in December. And they were all related to different aspects of fair housing enforcement and in closing some of those gaps that would allow almost 50%, 49% of the Black testers had disparate treatment. And if that was in a lawsuit, we say they were discriminated against. The other promising thing is there is a group of us, and you'll hear more about this, but different organizations, kind of a wide variety of organizations coming together to say we absolutely need affordable housing on Long Island. We need to do it in a way that understands fair housing. We should be, and there is a term, affirmatively furthering fair housing. That just means you take steps, affirmative steps, to further fair housing. You don't just sit back and wait for somebody to get discriminated against and then say, oh, that's terrible. Proactive. So you'll hear more about the group, but I'm very excited about the potential for change when you have, social service groups, certainly fair housing groups, but builders, people concerned about building the housing, a variety of people coming together and different types of organizations coming together to say we need to work together in order to make this happen.
Right.
So I'm encouraged by that.
I can feel just from talking to you for this little bit of time that we need to have a whole nother show with all of the things that you touch on when you're out there in the battle. It's great. It really is. And, you got to promise me you're going to come back because this conversation could have gone on for another 2.5 hours. No problem.
It was an important discussion, of course, always.
Yeah. So, but we really want to. We want to thank you for spending the time and coming to talk to us today. You're one of the newsmakers.
Yeah, and we've talked to a lot of the elected officials, and I know that they know who you are, and they know the organization, and the point is, we've spoke to Keith Herbert at the time with LI Divided. We spoke to the legislators, who sponsored some of those bills, and it was good to see how, again, good journalism can obviously, again, with good research, create good policy in theory. So thank you again for that, Elaine, and we look forward to speaking with you again in the future sometime soon. So take care. Please have a great weekend.
Thank you very much.
And we know you have some events coming up too, so we encourage folks, if they're interested, check that on social media.
And now we're very glad to be joined by George Santos, who is currently campaigning for the second time as the Republican and Conservative Party candidate to be the next U.S. Congress member to represent New York's 3rd District, which currently is held by Representative Tom Suozzi, who will vacate the seat at the end of this year after he decided to run for governor. George grew up in Queens with his parents, who had immigrated from Brazil. He went on to receive degrees in finance and economics at Baruch College and NYU, then worked his way through the finance industry with companies such as Citigroup, Goldman Sachs, and Linkbridge. Well, now, what is this? Could you tell our listening audience, especially those who are your potential constituents, a little more about yourself, including where you're from in the district?
Absolutely. No, thank you for having me, guys. So second time's a charm, as they say it, right? Too bad it's not against the same guy. But
maybe a little sweeter.
I wish him well. But again, so I come in the district. I live in Whitestone currently, but soon to become a Nassau County resident in the town of Oyster Bay Cove. Well, in the town of Oyster Bay. But that's been a long time coming. Has nothing to do with me trying to be more entrenched into the district. New York City is just not the same anymore. And when you're a Republican in New York City, it's not very kind. Our house has been a target for the last 2 years of vandalism, and I gave up.
Oh, your personal home?
Oh yeah, my personal home. We've suffered some pretty unflattering moments in the last 2 years. So.
That's a shame, certainly.
That's not good to hear.
It's never good. I don't wish it upon the Democrats. I don't wish it upon my colleagues in the Republican Party. I think we need to be a little bit more civil, but unfortunately, civility is escaping this country, and we need to fight to unite. We're all the same people. We all have and want the same things, and we want the betterment of America. But unfortunately, it's become different. It's a different world. It's a whole new world out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Certainly. We were just talking about some of that with our last guest, and knowing that, again, school board meetings, things that, were kind of boring now become, kind of WWE matches at times, it seems like.
It's a UFC SmackDown.
Yeah, exactly.
School board
right?
meetings. It's crazy.
So, yeah.
We were talking about how, I was telling them about a comedian I saw the other night, and, how in America recently, the last 20 years or so, we have a war on everything. There's a war on this, there's a war on that. So you can pick your dichotomy. You can pick, up and down. We had, the black-white, the rich-poor idea, and what he pointed out is that what we deal with today is truth and lies. The best quote I can think of is that, democracy depends on agreed-upon truths, and an autocracy depends on agreed-upon lies.
Absolutely.
So this is the atmosphere we're in now.
It seems like a tough atmosphere to want to join elected office. And, some might think, why would you want to leave the private sector? Probably a pretty well-paid position,
I'm not complaining.
So, the question is, again, what makes you kind of get back into, we'll say, maybe the mud, of electoral politics at this time? George?
Look, guys, here's where I am. My parents are both first generation immigrants. I'm first generation born American. I grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens. Not a nice place to be, especially in the 80s and the early 90s. Kind of dangerous area. Nobody really wanted to live in the area. It's become much better now with gentrification. But here's my take at why I'm doing this. I've been blessed by the American dream. I've been blessed by the opportunities that this country has given me, like it's given thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of people throughout its 250 years. I think that what we can all agree on is that if I don't step up to do this and to try to go fight for what I believe is right, who's going to do it? If we stand by idly and we look at what's going on in Congress, I don't know that anybody, I don't care where on the spectrum you fall, if you're far right, far left, center left, if you think that what we have happening in our government today is productive for anybody, it's just not. So I think people like me who can bring a business perspective, I'm new, fresh, full of fresh ideas, and I just want to bring a perspective of somebody who actually understands the burden of paying your taxes and living day to day as a civilian. I have no intention of serving for years of my life there. I want to do the constitutional version of Congress. You go, you give a couple of years of your life, and you go back to your normal life. And you walk away from it. You do the best you can when you're there, and then you let the next person come in. I don't want to go to Congress and serve 40, 30 years.
I've waited a long time to hear a politician say that.
Yeah, well, I've been saying that for a very long time. I think term limits is important. I think we need people who need to come into office who believe in America and the idea that America is, and not just the idea of how wealthy they're going to become after they leave Congress or while they're in Congress.
Well, I think, interestingly, we've had some discussions with, quite a few lawmakers, but we talked about, at one point, and John Adams writes about it, the two-party system, and he hated it. And I think Jefferson wrote him back about that. And they used it, and what they envisioned then, what they felt was the elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about, exists now.
Yep.
But we have people all over the political spectrum that talk about unity. How do we do that?
Well, look, and I don't like rhetoric talking points, but one can argue Biden has united the country into agreeing he's not fit to be president.
I think that's in general a cheap shot.
It is a cheap shot. No, like I said, it's
a consistent cheap shot.
It is a consistent cheap shot. Yes, it is. But I'm not going to miss it.
Tell me if you can. Well, you know what? You have an opportunity. There's an audience out there that thinks the president has something to do with the gas prices.
Well, here's a reality. I think the gas prices have to do with a lot of things. It's not just the president of the United States.
I think it's less him than anything else.
I think more so his policies that he could change and make it a little bit more friendly for exploration in the United States. But the reality is a culmination of things and factors. It's not anybody who blames the sitting president, whether a Republican or a Democrat, of the oil price. They're missing the point of macroeconomics. And I don't think we have enough time on the show to give you a full.
We can do that some other time.
Debrief, but I'm very happy to go down. Does the president bear responsibility? He bears a responsibility as the guy who's in office when
like the captain of the ship.
Of course.
He's the captain of the ship.
I
but
get that.
Aside from that, there's bigger factors. Congress can do a lot to mitigate that.
Right. Part of my issue is that when I ask certain lawmakers what are you going to do, it's just to complain about who's in charge. That does mean nothing. That does nothing for me.
Nope.
You spend, you have 30 minutes to give a dissertation, and your whole thing is complaining about the guy that's there. Well, that doesn't tell me anything about
me and my ideas.
No, not you. I'm saying in general, right?
Yeah.
Tell me what you think you're going to get accomplished, because that's a whole other thing. You're going to walk into those big doors in the state senate, and is it
Congress in this case.
Right, is it going to be what you envisioned? Is it going to be so easy to propose a bill and tomorrow it's law? And because we've talked to some guys who've been working on issues for years. I mean,
That's
years.
their excuse for staying there for years.
Well, I don't know. That's one way to look at it. But the other way to look at it is that it's so congested that even this guy with a good political record couldn't get things done.
So here's a problem with D.C. I'm not very familiar with state politics up in Albany. Actually, matter of fact, I was in Albany for the first time in my life just this week. So I'm
fresh.
Okay.
Yeah,
Fresh.
or not swampy, or that.
Okay, yeah, right.
Yeah,
so-
Long Island electeds I know took that trip on some local kind of control issues. But go ahead, George.
So here's what's going on. The reason we have such a broken system in Washington and in politics in general, it's a lot of bureaucracy. So here's the thing. I ran a campaign in 2020 against Tom Suozzi. I never once I never attacked him. I attacked some of his votes. Obviously, that's part of the gig when you're running. But the difference is I wouldn't just attack him. I would say, this is a bad vote. This is what I would do.
So it's
I would always give.
It's policy.
It's
you're
policy.
attacking him.
I debated him on policy. We had a very clean campaign, and I when I
That's
conceded
fair
to
game.
him, I said, "Hey, congratulations! Thanks for running a clean race." He did not go out there and sling mud at me. I didn't do it at him. I held him accountable to his policies.
Well, and that's as it should be.
So
That's what
here's
you want.
So here's what we want. We're in the North Shore of Long Island in the 3rd Congressional District. Did you know that every time winds exceed 35 miles an hour, we lose power? Did you know that?
Yeah.
That there's power outages across the North Shore every time it hits over 35 miles an hour. Now, on a summer storm day, that's almost every day.
Right.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, some would say we're saving the constituents' money.
Well,
Because when the power goes out, they don't have to pay for it.
I disagree.
The company might say that maybe. But
Well, look,
no, I know.
We'll talk about framing.
Well,
but that's,
let's talk about the facts here. Not when you're paying the level of property taxes you're paying in the North Shore, north of 60, 70, 80, some cases $100,000, $200,000 a year, right? I know a chunk of that goes to the education of your kids, but it also goes into infrastructure locally. We need to secure federal dollars to start strengthening the infrastructure of the electrical grid on Long Island, which has not been done since the 40s. So that was the last time some infrastructure was done on Long Island,
And
that meaningful
I
infrastructure.
personally think you should be talking to the electric car makers about that exact issue.
Well, I think
We're all going to get one soon, and we're all going to plug them in, and something's going to go poof.
Yeah, well, not only that, but we also need, if we want to make this push for electric cars, first of all, I think it's a 30-year plan, not a 5-year plan like they're trying to say, if we're being realistic here. We're not going to phase out fuel and fossil fuel in 5 years or 10 years. It's a 30-year plan at bare minimum. And we need to also develop the infrastructure. Right now, if you own an electric car, you're okay in a state like New York, you're okay in a state like California. But if you go across the rest of the country, you're not okay. From here to Atlantic City, for those who like to go for a nice weekend in Atlantic City, there's only one charging station and there's only 6 ports in that station. Most cars don't make that full ride from New York to Atlantic City. So I'm just giving you a quick example of how bad it is.
John, that's the new math problem. That's the new math problem. Instead of 2 trains leaving in different directions, if you have an electric car and you want to get to Atlantic City and you leave at 4 o'clock, what time do you have to hit the charging station to be at the table by 8?
Yep.
I get it, of course.
So these are real things.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no, of course. And we've spoken to Newsday's Mark Harrington, who's their energy and utility reporter, and he got an electric car himself, and he said, the same thing, that he obviously was eager to do it, but, he would like to have more infrastructure, in his own kind of personal life using his car. And to your point about those utility companies, we all remember what happened with Tropical Storm Isaias, and we all remember what happened with Ida more recently, and, lives lost and a lot of damage on the North Shore in what would be your potential district over in the kind of Manhasset and kind of Great Neck area and those hills. So there are a lot of issues, of course, still at play, and I think you framed some of them pretty well there. But let's get into a few more. I know some of the platform that you're running on and policy priorities. One being education, which you just raised. I know we'll get to property taxes in a second, but education. We are affiliated with the college. So what are your thoughts on what you maybe could do in terms of both primary, secondary, and higher education if you are elected to Congress?
Education is a springboard out of poverty. It worked for me. It's true, and it holds to be the truth of that holds to be self-evident. It works if you get a good education, if you focus on education. Now, you need to engage students, and that's where we have poor education in this country, is in the engagement in making education interesting enough to bring all the students in and kids in to take that in. But another problem that we have in this country is we're oftenly talking about college loans and cancel college debt. And I'm in a campus, so I don't know. You're probably going to throw me out of here.
That's okay. Nobody knows where we
are.
Outside
that door listening, I'm sure.
Nobody knows where we are. We're in a nondescript building in the basement. They won't find you.
Here's the problem. Sure. I don't think college is for everybody. I think we need to go back to pushing trade schools. And I mean this in a way where you're going to see a lot less hurt. Do you know how many students will pull out at least a $10,000 to $20,000 loan only to go for 2 semesters and say, this isn't for me, but now they're stuck with the debt because there was no aptitude test in high school because we've done away essentially with that in most schools in this country. And there's no real strong system to give you an alternative to college. Look, we still need plumbers, carpenters. We're going to need these people regardless, the trades, and we're not pushing them. In some cases, I feel like academia almost belittles and talks down to the folks in the trades and don't value them as much as they should be. Great, we need scholars, we need economists, we need doctors, we need nurses, but we also need painters, we need carpenters. We need to push that as an alternative. If higher education isn't for you, we need to invest money in aptitude tests. We need to invest money in putting back trades in high school so that these kids have access to the trades in a larger, more broader spectrum. It saves A, the government money. It saves B, the taxpayer money. And C, it gives people an alternative to figure things out before they go $20,000 in the hole.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that people should be made aware that those options exist, but I'm not a big fan of the idea of aptitude tests and telling kids who should go and who shouldn't go. That still should be a personal decision.
Absolutely a personal decision.
If you want to waste your money going to college and
or your parents
and graduating with an aviary degree or
absolutely,
and then complain that you couldn't find a job but the issue at the moment though is students carrying $1 trillion in debt. This is hampering the economy, especially on Long Island.
Oh, yeah.
Why aren't people buying houses or the young people? Because they can't. They can't even move forward. And they're lucky if they got their barista job at Starbucks and you're carrying $120,000 in student. That's not a future. You're dead in the water.
Well, there's two ways I look at it. One, wildly unpopular opinion, but it's personal accountability. It's responsibility. You need to own up.
Doesn't fix the problem.
It doesn't fix the problem. And then the second one is we need to hold institutions accountable, right? So a lot of times nobody talks about why are they in so much debt to attain an education. And that's when the institutions come into play where you can go, I went to Baruch College, but CUNY school, great quality education. I have zero debt. $3,200 a semester at the time. Zero debt. You could get a job, go to college, and pay for it. You get your financial aid.
That algorithm is no longer a truth.
Well, it still holds.
Go to college, get a good job, and pay.
Well, not a good job. You have a college job.
Well, we're still having a discussion about $15 minimum wage, which is ridiculous when you live on Long Island. If you're working 40 hours a week, you're going to make $600 before they take the taxes out.
Before they rape you.
Where are you living?
Oh, yeah, it's absolutely.
You can't even afford to put gas in your car with $15 an hour at 40 hours a week.
So here's where I stand on minimum wage. I think we need to understand that inflation is a big cause. $15 an hour, everybody's arguing on 15. 15 should be the minimum wage. I'm like, really, 15 with this inflation does nothing.
We're up to 27, 28.
Look, the reality is if you want people to have a fair option at a job and livelihood, especially in an area like Long Island, it all circles back to infrastructure, accountability with institutions, as I just mentioned, is we need to hold them to, if you're going to accept federal dollars into your institution, you need to really bill the students at a reasonable, fair rate. Instead of these, look, we're looking at...
But isn't this the exact same reason we don't have universal health care? Because the medical industry is not going to accept what you're going to pay them for the services they provide.
Of course not.
It's the Walmart story. I make a widget, and then I go to Walmart and say, these are great. They say, we agree, that's really great. Okay, I'm going to sell them for $10 a piece. And Walmart said, no, you're going to sell them for 59 cents a piece, and you're going to like it.
Well, look...
Now we're talking reality.
We're talking reality. It's capitalism. It is what it is. Look.
There's vulture capitalism. There's venture capitalism.
And there is people who take straight advantage of you. I've seen that in private equity for 13 years.
It's like the thing, too, John and I spoke about this with student loans. People talk about, let's get rid of the student loans. And you say, so a student thinks, oh, great, I'm free and clear. And what they don't realize is that the IRS is going to look at that student loan forgiveness as income to you.
Of course.
So Well, you say, of course. Most of the people who are reading this and who are championing forgiveness of student loans never mention
about
this.
Tax time.
Look, here's where we are, right? And cheap shot, but I will take the cheap shot. We have too many people like AOC and Elizabeth Warren who understand very little about finance.
Okay, so don't complain about them. Tell me what you do different.
I would educate the masses on here's a reality. We cancel your debt. You owe $200,000. Now you've just received $200,000 in income,
Bingo.
And you're going to have to be held accountable for that tax this year, this fiscal year.
The new creditor is not as nice as the
no,
old
it's not.
creditor.
No, not at all. And that's when they come for you. They put liens on your homes. You can't get a job without having your wages garnished. It's the IRS now we're talking about.
Yep.
You're really up against Uncle Sam proper.
Yeah.
Before you had a subsidiary of Uncle
You're
Sam.
right. He was farming out that. Right.
Now you have Uncle Sam proper.
That's right.
And guess what? Uncle Sam eats before we all do.
Yeah.
So that's the reality.
That's one of our things here on the show is to make people aware of the reality, because it's not just about forgiveness of student loans. It's the pickle you're going to be in. If that
a lot of times it's the fine print, of course, like you said. It's
the devil is in the details.
Absolutely.
Put into the headline.
And here's something I'll throw at you, and a lot of people say, "Well, George, you can't say that. That's not fair." I'm like, "Well, life isn't fair.
You say whatever you want."
Here's a reality. Why should and this trickles back to this is unmitigated debt now that we gave the money away, but it's still affecting the balance sheets of the federal government, which is going to go into the debt, which raises inflation, and it penalizes taxpayers, right? So why should non-college educated taxpayers be subsidizing and being penalized through raising debt and inflation for those who chose to go to college, and now they're not taking a personal responsibility and owning up to that decision? I'm not holding it against you.
Okay.
I'm just saying you made a choice.
Right.
You should be held responsible.
Okay.
For it.
Now, why don't we use that same logic on? And you were in the financial industry. You worked on Wall Street.
I have.
The 2008 debacle when they put all those bad and they committed.
People should be in jail.
And they admitted criminal activity, and not. That's why I had the police commissioner here, and we spoke to him, and he made the mention that we're a country of laws. And I told him, no.
For some.
I refuse to, I won't accept it. And mentioned the 2008. We had big financial guys get up and say we committed crimes. Not one of them stood in front of a judge.
No.
So I told the police commissioner, when that happens, I may begin to agree with you that we're a country of laws. But they're a country of laws when it's convenient.
I will say this, and tell me this and tell me if I'm wrong. Have you ever heard of a Goldman Sachs employee take the stage at the largest private equity conference in the world, SALT, run by Anthony Scaramucci, and berate their employer? Well, I did that. And I did it in the fashion of renewable energy and global warming. This was the panel I was on. And they're all talking about solar, wind, and this was back, 7 years ago now. Okay. And I said, you know what? This is a scam. It's taxpayer money that gets into the subsidy. That gets subsidized. Oh, there I go. That gets subsidized into, these private equity firms that put the money into the firms they buy, into the technology they own. Mm-hmm. The money circles right back around, and then they go and buy the media companies to sell you the scare. Global warming, you must do your part. Buy our solar panels. Right. That's a scam. That's a scam. We've been scamming the American people all these years, and there should be laws against that. Look, I believe hundreds of people from Wall Street should have been put in jail, especially from Citibank, and Bank of America, and Goldman Sachs in 2008. But like you said, it's rules for thee, not for me in most parts in this country.
And they'll do it again.
They will. They will. Look, they're doing it again right now.
So this is the thing about bubbles and the student loan thing. What we should learn from this is to never let it happen again. That ought to be the drive. The other thing that always occurs to me when we talk about financial stuff, and our Christian brethren, they never talk about Jubilee. You ever read that in the Bible? Every 50 years, they wipe the debt clean. It's the Old Testament, so maybe you're not familiar with that, but okay.
Yeah, that's an interesting, thing to bring up.
But that never comes up. That never comes up. Nope. It's always, the
idea of debt forgiveness, and right. I think like what we're talking about here, dealing with things on the front end or dealing with things on the back end.
Yeah.
And to your point, George, and we'll do a shameless plug of the college. That's why we definitely would recommend folks, especially those kind of figuring out, where they want to be in the professional world, spend the money on community college, get a 4.0 if you want to.
Well,
it makes sense for you.
Nassau,
you can go to Columbia.
Nassau Community College is the best kept secret in New York. Because
but the point is, you don't have to go to Columbia. If not, you could just take certifications for a technical trade course here. You could, go to BOCES. There's a lot of other, kind of methods for different people.
Yep.
But the whole point is, I think, access to opportunity, which I know people consider an American kind of ideal. And so I guess, that is the other side of the coin. So I guess your thoughts on that, George, but also, you raised climate change there. And, I think that's certainly an issue that Long Islanders care about in terms of the environment here. So we can get into that as well, I guess.
I'll give you a 2-for-1 on this one real quick. But as far as education, I believe access is where that's the word, access. It should be accessible for everybody, not free. I don't believe in free. I believe nothing is free. That's the reality.
Teachers got to get paid.
Everybody, and bills have to be paid. Electricity bills have to be paid. Stuff has to be bought. So I believe it should be accessible. And I also believe in the necessity to expose that slate of options to students before they make any hard commitments and indebt themselves. And then number 2 on climate change. Look, I love the environment. I want the country. I want the world to be here for my kids and my grandkids. And I care about the oceans. I care. Look, I'm a big nature guy. I surfed most of my youth. So, being from parents from Brazil, I got to surf a lot. So I love the ocean. I have a really great connection with it. It's a shame when I see polluted oceans and accidents like Fukushima in Japan back in 2011, pouring all that radiation into the ocean. I don't want to see those things happen. And I do believe that, we need to do client conscious, make those decisions. We just can't put the climate above the livelihood of everybody, because without us there is no world, and without the world there is no us. So we can't be extremist absolutists.
It's got to be tempered.
No, understood. And
all right,
we'll segue to some other issues, but wanted to mention what, Bill, we run on time?
Yes, we are. It's the clock on the wall is screaming at me, so.
Okay, well, we'll have to have you back on another
time.
I'll
come back.
Certainly.
Yes, George, we could probably talk another.
Absolutely.
2 days, so.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Especially on environmental issues, of course, with a lot of the pollution, like you said, around here, the Long Island Sound, big priorities. So we'll talk more about that and the subsidies for the traditional fossil fuels as well. Your thoughts on that maybe next time.
I want to thank you for actually showing up at the door. I wasn't expecting that. I expected to see you on the computer screen.
Boom, I'm here.
Yeah, that's great. Very cool. Very cool.
That's a good thing. It shows up.
And we'll have to definitely do it again. And like we do with guests, I'm going to make you promise you'll come back.
I will. So, I'll be back. Just have me.
Untie some other stuff. But other than that, John, you ready for supposed to be a nice weekend?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Not as long as last Memorial Day weekend, but certainly that was a good time. Obviously honoring those who served and those who were fallen in combat. But certainly look at some good weather this weekend. Looking forward to enjoying that. Hope you both do also.
It's going to be real nice.
Course.
I'll teach you one thing. It's never a happy Memorial Day. It's a joyous.
That's exactly right.
It's a joyous Memorial Day.
And no fireworks, folks. Anybody listening to this? You don't need fireworks.
We don't. That's for 4th of July.
Yeah, really.
No, they don't want to trigger PTSD. Again, my family had POWs in it, and again, a lot of the things that people kind of just say to veterans, as kind of throwaways. People need to think a little bit more about.
It goes back to education. It just goes back to education. Exactly what you said.
Of course.
Our generations knew things that newer generations
an educated
don't know
society
yet.
Is an informed society.
There you go. And we want to thank Kim Tracy for putting all this together and keeping us online. But the clock on the wall is screaming that it's time for us to get out of here. Just to remind you, you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the radio voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre with Jon Gallo. I want to thank you for listening and remind you can catch this week's Long Island News every Friday at 3 o'clock, right here on the station that helps you communicate, 90.3 WHPC.